ready for a pulse-pounding showdown between a fearless former Delta Force operative and a ruthless biker gang? In this electrifying tale, a determined truck accident lawyer named Catherine "Cat" Duvall finds her peaceful hometown under siege. She taps into her covert military past to outmaneuver a horde of intimidating bikers who threaten to destroy everything in their path. Guns blaze, motorcycles roar, and cunning traps await as Cat leads the townspeople in a high-stakes struggle against overwhelming odds. The tension builds with each twist and turn, leading to a finale you won't want to miss. Before you dive into the full story, make sure to subscribe to this channel to stay updated on more action-packed narratives and engaging plots. Your support and feedback drive us to create even better, more thrilling stories. Stick around to find out how Kat and her neighbors fight back and discover the secret that leaves the Firewolves MC utterly stunned. At precisely 6:30 in the morning, the dew still clung to the patches of wild grass surrounding the quiet truck stop on the outskirts of Sweetwater County. The sun was just beginning its daily climb, casting long shadows across the parking lot where a few long-haul trucks were parked. It was the kind of place most travelers ignored, a humble refueling station, complete with a small diner that smelled perpetually of bacon grease and drip coffee. People came here not for the ambiance, but for a moment of rest on lonely highways. The rumor among local folks was that the diner served the best cherry pie for 100 miles, though only a handful of truckers and ranchers ever seemed to confirm that. One of those few regular customers was a woman named Catherine "Cat" Duvall. She was slender and stood about 5'7", with a posture that suggested years of discipline and an elegance at odds with the dusty surroundings. Cat was known to the locals simply as the truck accident lawyer. She had her own small law office in the nearest town, offering services to anyone involved in commercial trucking wrecks. Most days, her job was about negotiating insurance claims or fighting for truck drivers who got the short end of the stick. But there was an unspoken layer beneath her cordial nods and polite smiles, a tangible aura that made even the rowdiest truckers straighten up when she walked by. If anyone ever peered deeper, they might notice certain incongruous details about her. For instance, the way she reflexively scanned every exit upon entering a room, or how her hand could snap up almost imperceptibly whenever someone spoke loudly behind her, as though ready to respond if the situation demanded it. Despite her approachable manner, Kat exuded a self-assured calm that was difficult to ignore. It was the kind of composure that came not from a year of yoga classes, but from years of intense, adrenaline-fueled experiences. Of course, most folks just assumed she had a sturdy constitution, a capable professional who'd seen a lot of messy accident scenes. But the reality was far more extraordinary. Kat had once been an elite Delta Force operative, stationed in places so classified that even her immediate neighbors would never dream of them. She'd spent over a decade traveling the globe on missions that required surgical precision, unwavering courage, and cunning tactics. Those days were long behind her, or so she believed. The landscape itself gave Kat a sense of tranquility she rarely found elsewhere. There was a serenity in these remote spaces, from the wide-open sky to the deserted roads that stretched on for miles. It was the perfect place for someone looking to hang up her battle gear, someone who wanted to lead a quieter life, resolving conflicts in a courtroom instead of on a battlefield. And if she occasionally had to dig into her arsenal of martial prowess, it was usually to handle rowdy bar patrons or to break up the occasional parking lot dispute. Around here, there was a gentle understanding that Catherine Duvall was not a woman to be trifled with. Yet early that morning, as she sipped her coffee by the diner window, Kat couldn't help feeling the subtle prickle of her instincts, the intangible sense that something in the air had shifted. It was as though the wind was carrying in the scent of danger, whispering warnings only her refined senses could catch. She glanced out at the parking lot and noticed a group of bikers rolling in, their engines roaring like thunder. Their vests displayed patches she didn't immediately recognize, and that was unusual around these parts. Kat couldn't have guessed it then, but this was the first tremor of a looming conflict, one that would soon threaten everything and everyone she cared about. The cluster of bikers halted in a ragged row near the gas pumps, engines rumbling in unison like a menacing choir. Each rider wore a leather vest emblazoned with a snarling wolf's head surrounded by jagged flames. Even from a distance, Kat could sense the attitude in their swagger. There were 5 of them. The one in front, presumably the leader, swung a long leg over his Harley, surveyed the gas station, and smirked. Inside the diner, the clatter of utensils fell silent for a moment. The cook, a tough old rancher named George, paused behind the counter, his thick gray eyebrows knitted. For years, the biggest trouble in Sweetwater County was usually a couple of teens partying on a weekend, or some random drifter who had too much to drink. Organized biker gangs seldom passed through. Sure, there were touring groups of weekend warriors, but these men didn't look like casual riders. Their eyes were sharper, their movements more deliberate, as though they were scouting the territory. Kat watched them fill their tanks and exchange guarded looks. She saw how each of them stood with a certain tension, hands close to their hips, eyes scanning. They reminded her of mercenaries standing at ease, seemingly relaxed yet fully aware of potential threats. She considered stepping outside to greet them in a friendly manner, maybe offer them directions or a handshake, but instinct kept her in her seat. While there was no immediate hostility in the air, something about them reeked of trouble. A moment later, the diner door squeaked open. Two of the bikers sauntered inside. One was short but stocky, with a tattoo of a coiled serpent around his neck. The other was lanky, wearing tinted glasses that hid his eyes. They made a show of scanning the diner's patrons, just a handful of truckers quietly finishing their breakfast. Then their gaze fell on Catherine. They held her stare a bit longer than was polite, as though trying to assess if she posed any threat. Kat offered a cordial nod, hoping to diffuse any brewing tension, but she could sense their curiosity. "Morning," she said calmly, raising her coffee mug. She noticed the short, stocky man's eyes flick toward her holstered cell phone, lingering as if expecting to see a weapon. Kat's pulse remained even. She'd encountered men like these before, in forward operating bases and seedy border towns halfway around the world. The best approach was usually firm politeness. "Mornin'," the lanky biker responded, but his tone was flat. He turned toward the waitress behind the counter. "Eggs, over easy. Lots of hot sauce," he ordered, voice clipped. The other one glowered at Kat for another second before sliding onto a stool. Kat returned her attention to her coffee, pretending to look uninterested, though her mind was already ticking like a well-calibrated clock. She noted the way their leather vests bore the name Firewolves MC, synonym. She couldn't recall ever hearing about them in local news, but that didn't mean they were harmless. Plenty of unsavory groups stayed under the radar until they struck. Subtly, she glanced outside again. The other three bikers stood by their motorcycles, scanning the highway, making short calls on their phones, and occasionally glancing at the diner. A tiny knot of unease twisted in Kat's stomach. This small truck stop might just be a way station for them, but if their intentions were more sinister, innocent people could be in danger. While Kat had no intention of reliving her old life, some instincts never slept. If trouble was brewing, she had no choice but to pay attention. Soon enough, rumors began to swirl among the handful of people in the diner. A middle-aged couple passing through whispered about a motorcycle gang that had been sighted in the next county, suspected in a string of burglaries. One trucker recalled seeing a group with the same wolf's head patch at a rest area a week ago, demanding tolls from drivers who looked vulnerable. Another local man quietly told George the cook that he'd heard from the sheriff's department about some suspicious riders who were making their way through small towns. They were possibly involved in intimidation rackets, muscling in on properties or extorting local businesses. While these were only rumors, Kat made it a point to listen carefully. As an attorney who specialized in truck accidents, she was well-versed in navigating complicated legal territory, but she also recognized when street-level threats required more than words on a legal brief. And if this group had bigger ambitions, like expanding their presence or turning Sweetwater County into part of their illicit route, local folk would be in real danger. The question weighed on her mind. Were they simply passing by, or did they have designs on the area? A few moments later, the two bikers finished their breakfast. One of them, Serpent Neck, Kat mentally labeled him, pulled out a handful of crumpled bills. He slapped the money on the counter with an air of careless arrogance, as though asserting dominance. The waitress thanked him, but he ignored her and let his gaze wander back to Kat, who was now signing her own check. For a tense second, she thought he might say something. Instead, he merely curled his lip in a sneer before heading out. She watched as the group convened again by the gas pumps. Their low voices and intense expressions suggested they were exchanging vital information. Occasionally, a hand gesture or a pointed glance at the surroundings hinted at a plan. Kat's gut told her that these men weren't just random travelers. Her mind rolled through possible scenarios. Maybe they were scouting for supply routes, or perhaps they planned to extort local businesses. Even so, she also knew it was premature to leap into operative mode. She had a law practice to manage, clients to represent, and cases piling up on her desk. Starting a confrontation without concrete evidence or cause would do more harm than good, especially if these bikers turned out to be nothing more than a ragtag group passing through. Still, her instincts warned her to remain watchful. On her way out, Kat paused by George's counter. "You take care, okay?" she said softly. George nodded, wiping a bead of sweat off his brow. He understood the subtext. Trouble might be brewing, and if so, they both knew there were few resources in this quiet region to handle a full-fledged biker gang. The local sheriff's department was small, rarely dealing with anything beyond DUI stops and petty theft. Stepping into the warm morning air, Kat felt the tension coil within her. She watched the bikers from the corner of her eye as she walked to her SUV. Each step reminded her of times she'd approached potential hostiles during covert missions. Her breath remained even, her pulse stable, but memories flickered in the back of her mind. Flashbacks of adrenaline-charged nights. As she turned the ignition, the plan was simple. Head back to her office, carry on like normal, and keep an ear to the ground. If this group lingered or escalated their behavior, she'd be ready, though she fervently hoped it wouldn't come to that. Kat's law office was located in a two-story brick building near the center of the small town. The hand-painted sign reading Duval and Associates, Truck Accident Specialists, hung modestly above the entrance. Inside, the reception area was cozy, if a bit worn. The walls were lined with framed newspaper clippings of successful cases Kat had handled, from securing fair settlements for injured truck drivers to pro bono work helping local farmers settle land disputes. To the untrained eye, it was simply the office of a dedicated, compassionate attorney. No one would suspect that its owner had once led squads through jungles and deserts under the hush-hush banner of Delta Force. Kat's assistant, Mara, greeted her with a concerned look. "I heard there were some rough-looking bikers at the truck stop this morning," she said, brushing back a strand of dark hair. Mara had a knack for hearing every bit of local gossip. "Is everything okay?" "Probably just passing through," Kat replied, setting down her briefcase. "But let's stay alert. If you see anything unusual, or if anyone calls about harassment, let me know immediately." Mara nodded, though Kat could see a trace of worry linger in her eyes. People in small towns often felt a sense of collective vulnerability when outsiders arrived unexpectedly. They shared resources and news, but they also shared fears. Kat gave Mara a reassuring smile before heading to her office. As she sat behind her desk, she opened her laptop to check emails but couldn't fully focus. Her mind kept wandering back to the bikers, the patches, the way they carried themselves, the tension in their body language. Over the next couple of hours, Kat threw herself into work, reviewing depositions from a recent truck collision case. She was used to multitasking under stress, something she'd perfected during her Special Forces tenure. The phone rang intermittently, mostly routine client inquiries or scheduling updates for upcoming court dates. Still, a creeping sense of unease persisted, like a background hum that refused to go away. Around midday, Mara tapped gently on Kat's door, her expression more troubled than before. "There's a call on line 2. A local man, Mr. Colburn. He says some bikers vandalized his fence and threatened his dog. He's really shaken up." Kat's spine straightened. She lifted the receiver. "Mr. Colburn, this is Catherine Duval. I'm an attorney here in town. Could you tell me exactly what happened?" A shaky voice on the other end relayed a troubling account. A group of men on motorcycles had ridden past his small ranch earlier that morning. They revved their engines, tore up his gravel driveway, and damaged a wooden fence. When Colburn's German Shepherd barked at them, one of the men threatened to shoot the dog if it came any closer. Colburn recognized the wolf's head patches they wore, just like the ones Kat had seen at the truck stop. They left, but not without delivering a thinly veiled warning to mind his business. Heart pounding, Kat assured Mr. Colburn that she'd do whatever she could to help. She advised him to call the sheriff and file a report immediately. Once she hung up, she took a deep breath. The gears of her mind began to turn. This wasn't just a random incident. A pattern was forming, a pattern that suggested the bikers weren't content to pass through peacefully. They were testing boundaries, intimidating residents, and establishing a foothold. There was a line in the sand, and it seemed these bikers were inching closer to crossing it. Kat felt a stir of old reflexes, the calm, methodical readiness that came with being trained to face dangerous adversaries. She had hoped never to use those skills again, at least not in a life or death capacity. But if the safety of her community was at stake, she might have no other choice. Late that afternoon, Kat locked the office door and set off to visit Mr. Colburn's ranch personally. She believed in gathering first-hand evidence, whether for legal cases or for her own peace of mind. The drive took her along winding back roads framed by barbed wire fences and endless fields of swaying grass. Here the sky felt bigger, and the isolation, though beautiful, also meant limited resources for dealing with a dangerous group. When she arrived, Colburn, a wiry man in his 60s, was waiting near the damaged fence, his face etched with a mixture of anger and fear. Pieces of splintered wood lay scattered on the ground, and his German shepherd, Samson, stood guard, growling softly at the memory of the intrusion. Kat gently patted the dog and then knelt to examine the tire tracks. "They came right through here," Colburn explained, pointing to torn-up patches of dirt. "I tried to shout them off, but that only made them laugh. One of them even said something like, 'Better get used to us, old man.' It was like they were staking a claim." Kat listened intently, making mental notes. She checked the bullet casings or any other sign of more lethal threats, but found none. "Have you called the sheriff?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am, left a message. But they're short-staffed. Deputy said they'd send someone when they can. Lord knows how long that'll be." She nodded, pressing her lips together in frustration. The reality was that Sweetwater County's Sheriff's Department had just a handful of deputies, spread thin over a large area. By the time they'd respond in force, these bikers could already have done significant harm. "I'll talk to the sheriff myself," Kat promised, standing up and brushing the dirt off her jeans. She stepped away from the fence, scanning the horizon. In times past, she would have set up a perimeter, established guard shifts, or even laid down a strategic plan to repel aggressors. But that was the soldier in her. Now she was an attorney. She had to proceed within the boundaries of the law, at least initially. "In the meantime, be careful, Mr. Colburn. Keep your phone on hand, and if they come back, call me immediately." She handed him a card with her cell number on it. He nodded, pressing it between calloused fingers. "Thank you, Ms. Duval. The folks around here, we rely on each other. I guess you're all we've got right now." Driving back, Kat's mind buzzed with questions. Why was this biker gang picking on random rural properties? Were they collecting vantage points or simply testing the local defenses? Their sense of impunity, threatening a man and his dog on his own land, suggested they were confident no meaningful resistance would come from law enforcement. That kind of arrogance was dangerous. As the sun dipped low in the sky, painting everything with a burnt orange glow, Kat clenched the steering wheel a little tighter. Her old self, the Delta Force operative, whispered strategies for dealing with a mounting threat. Reconnaissance, infiltration, neutralization. But she also needed to remain within the confines of her new life. Still, if push came to shove, she wouldn't hesitate to protect her neighbors. She might have traded her rifle for legal briefs, but her resolve to defend what she cherished was unbreakable. By nightfall, word had spread through the tight-knit community. Several residents reported spotting the biker gang riding around, sometimes in smaller groups, sometimes as a full pack. They were observed lingering near local businesses that had closed for the evening, peering into windows, rattling locked doors. Kat spent the evening making phone calls to clients, colleagues, and a few personal acquaintances who might have some knowledge of outlaw motorcycle clubs. She even tried an old Army contact who now worked in private security, hoping for insights on this Firewolves MC. Unfortunately, she got little more than vague warnings. They were known to run protection rackets, sometimes focusing on quiet towns that they could dominate without much pushback. They leveraged fear and intimidation more than overt violence, at least in the initial stages. It was a classic tactic, force compliance through psychological warfare, and if that failed, escalate the aggression. Around 9 o'clock, just as Kat was contemplating shutting off the lights in her office and heading home, She heard the distant roar of engines. The sound was faint at first, but quickly grew in volume. Peering out her window, she spotted half a dozen motorcycles rolling through Main Street, their headlights carving bright beams across the darkened shops. Within moments, they arrived in front of her building. The men dismounted, filling the sidewalk with leather and looming silhouettes. Her pulse quickened, but her training kicked in. She shut off the main office lights, quietly stepped away from the window, and positioned herself in a shadowed corner behind the door. A million thoughts rushed through her head. Should she call the sheriff immediately? Should she confront them? The possibility of them trying to break in was all too real. A muffled voice from outside. "I think this is where that fancy lawyer works. The truck accident one." Another voice responded with a sneer. "We'll see how tough she is." Their boots clomped on the sidewalk, followed by a metallic scraping sound, one of them dragging a crowbar along the pavement, maybe to stoke fear. Kat's heart thundered, but she remained cool. She retrieved a small, legally registered pistol from her desk drawer. Even though her training with firearms was extensive, she had to be mindful of the law. In this state, she could only use a firearm if threatened with lethal force. She inhaled slowly, assessing her options. The building had sturdy doors and security bars on the windows. If these men truly intended to break in, she would have time to call the police and position herself defensively. A loud, echoing knock startled the stillness. One of the bikers pounded on the front door. "Hey, Ms. Duval, we hear you're the big shot around here. Step outside for a chat, will you?" Another round of laughter followed, laced with malice. She knew better than to let them corner her in a direct confrontation. Instead, she stayed silent. Perhaps they'd retreat if they realized she wasn't alone or easily intimidated. Yet these men seemed eager to make a statement. Their sheer brazenness in the center of town, under the faint glow of street lamps, spoke volumes. They didn't fear the sheriff or anyone else. Finally, after a tense couple of minutes, the footsteps receded. Engines started again. Kat chanced to glance out the window to see them roaring away. But before leaving, the largest biker turned and hurled something, a brick maybe, through a nearby shop's display window, shattering the glass with a crash that reverberated down the empty street. Then they sped off, leaving broken shards and a stinging sense of violation in their wake. The next morning brought a wave of unrest. Kat arrived at her office early, only to find a handful of townspeople congregated on the sidewalk, staring somberly at the shattered window across the street. The owner of the small bakery there was nearly in tears, lamenting the cost of replacing the glass and the sense of security she'd lost overnight. Folks traded murmurs of concern and anger, acknowledging that something had to be done about these invaders. Kat tried to reassure them that the sheriff would handle the situation, but deep inside she harbored doubts. Law enforcement might do what they could, yet their limited capacity paled against a determined biker gang. As people dispersed, Kat crossed the street to speak privately with the bakery owner, offering to help with any legal measures, even covering some costs until the insurance claim went through. Then, returning to her own office, she found a single sheet of paper wedged under the door. In crude, hand-scrawled lettering, it read, "Stay out of our way, lawyer lady, or we'll make sure you regret it." A sinking feeling took hold in her chest. For the first time in a long while, Kat felt the old tension coil in her shoulders, the sense that a genuine threat loomed, one that might require her to step beyond legal measures. She took a few moments to steel herself, then called the sheriff. The deputy on duty sounded exasperated. "Ms. Duval, we're doing all we can. We've received multiple complaints about these bikers. The sheriff is trying to coordinate with the state troopers for backup." He paused. "In the meantime, be careful. These people mean business." Hanging up, Kat realized that if the local authorities weren't enough to stop them, it might fall on her or anyone else with enough courage and know-how to protect Sweetwater County. She glanced at her reflection in the office window, her hair neatly tied back, her business attire immaculate. She looked every inch the capable attorney she was, but behind her eyes lay the honed instincts of a special operative, suppressed yet still potent. Throughout the day, she handled client calls with professional composure, but in the back of her mind, she strategized. She mentally mapped out vantage points in town, recalling old urban combat scenarios. She knew how to set up basic surveillance, gather intelligence, and even create improvised defenses if it came down to it. But as she rummaged through these mental files, she wrestled with the morality of escalating the situation. She was no longer an active soldier, and these were American citizens, even if they were violent criminals. However, if their intentions escalated further, the entire community would be in jeopardy. By late afternoon, another call came in, this time from the diner's owner, George. He said the bikers had shown up again, demanding free meals, and when George refused, they overturned chairs and threatened to torch the place if he didn't comply. That settled it in Kat's mind. She couldn't just wait for the cavalry. The Firewolves MC were stepping up their game, and it was only a matter of time before someone got seriously hurt. Glancing at a modest filing cabinet against the wall, she knew what lay hidden at the back of the bottom drawer. Old memories and old tools from her former life. She had never expected to need them again, certainly not in her quiet second career. But life had a way of drawing her back into conflict, whether she wanted it or not. That evening, Kat drove out to her secluded property a few miles from town. The sun was dipping below the horizon by the time she stepped out of her SUV. The small house she called home was built for tranquility, a single-story structure with wide windows that overlooked rolling fields. Neighbors were few and far between. In the silence of the twilight, she could almost imagine that everything was normal, that there was no threat lurking just beyond the gentle swaying grass. But as she walked around the back of her house, she unlocked a heavy metal shed. Inside were relics of a past she rarely spoke of. A battered footlocker marked with faded stencils of her old unit, a few locked cases containing firearms, a carefully folded Kevlar vest. Each item carried echoes of operations overseas, stories of ambushes, stealthy infiltrations, and narrow escapes. Her heart thumped with a mix of resolve and resignation. She hadn't wanted to revisit this side of her life. She'd chosen a quieter, more civilized path. Yet the vow she'd made, long before she ever joined Delta Force, was to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. That vow didn't vanish just because she changed careers. Methodically, she checked each piece of gear to ensure it was still in working condition. Her M4 carbine, broken down into compact components, shone with a well-maintained sheen under the single overhead light. Her sidearm, a 9mm pistol she once carried in distant war zones, felt oddly comforting in her grip. Next, she inspected her supply of ammunition. There wasn't much, but likely enough if she kept her shots precise. As she moved on to communications gear, a portable radio, a set of earpieces, she recalled her old squad mates, remembering how seamlessly they coordinated missions. Now she'd be operating solo if the bikers forced her hand. She shook away the sentimental swirl. This was no time for nostalgia. She needed a plan. After securing her gear, she drove to a vantage point just outside town, an old water tower that granted a wide view of the main roads. With darkness fully settled, the roads were mostly empty, save for an occasional pickup truck or the headlights of a distant car. Kat parked discreetly and climbed partway up the tower's rusted ladder, scanning with a small pair of night vision binoculars. She watched for any sign of the bikers, particularly around the diner or the truck stop. Sure enough, around 10 o'clock, she spotted several motorcycles roaring down the highway. They turned off toward the truck stop, presumably to continue their campaign of intimidation, or maybe even robbery. Kat noted their numbers, 8 riders this time, and their approximate armaments. She couldn't see guns from this distance, but she recognized the shapes of bats or clubs strapped to some of the bikes. A part of her wanted to storm in, apprehend them, and end this menace. But she knew better. Charging in alone against a group of armed criminals was a recipe for disaster. Instead, she made mental notes, recorded what she could on her phone, and began formulating a strategy. She'd pass the intel to the sheriff's department first thing in the morning, though she doubted it would change the fundamental problem. The Firewolves MC believed they could do as they pleased, and local law enforcement would be too slow, too undermanned to stop them effectively. As the bikers roared off again, disappearing into the darkness, Kat felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a familiar rucksack. She was drifting back into the persona she had long since put aside. The question was no longer if she would act, but when, and just how far she'd have to go. The following day brought a sense of collective anxiety that hung over the town like a storm cloud. Reports kept coming in, a hardware store burglarized in the early hours, the diner coerced into handing over a portion of its daily take, and local ranchers nervous about who might show up next. The sheriff's department issued a statement urging calm, stating they were investigating the matter. But everyone knew that was a flimsy bandage over a festering wound. Kat convened a discreet meeting with a few influential townsfolk, George from the diner, Mr. Colburn, and even the mayor, a weary woman named Judith Parker who was desperate for solutions. They gathered in the back room of Kat's law office, talking in hushed tones over the hum of an old ceiling fan. Kat shared her observations from the night before, explaining that the bikers seemed well organized and ready to escalate. "We need more than one deputy cruising around town," George said, folding his arms across his grease-stained apron. "We need real protection." Judith rubbed her temples. "We tried contacting the state police. They're spread thin, too. There's a big operation a couple counties over. Something about a cartel bust." Mr. Colburn sighed, tapping his cane against the floor. "We're on our own then, just like I feared." Kat cleared her throat, drawing their attention. She chose her words carefully. "There might be a way to discourage them. I have some experience dealing with groups like these, but it will require a unified effort. I can't do it alone." George's eyes narrowed. "What kind of experience are we talking about?" She glanced around the room, measuring their trust. "Before I became a lawyer, I served in the military, in special operations. I know a thing or two about defensive tactics, setting up watch points, gathering intel." She didn't dive into the details. Delta Force wasn't something she could discuss openly, and even if she could, it might just shock them further. She needed their cooperation more than their awe. Judith leaned forward. "So you're telling us you can set up a protection plan for our town?" Kat nodded. "Something like that. But it'll require coordination. Volunteers willing to keep watch at night, secure communications, maybe even booby traps in key locations if the gang tries a major assault." She paused, letting the gravity sink in. "It won't be legal in the usual sense of the word, but we'll do our best to stay within the bounds of self-defense. If these bikers threaten lethal force, we're justified in protecting ourselves." The room fell silent as each person realized the town was on the brink of a confrontation that could turn violent. Finally, George spoke, determination in his voice. "They burned my friend's barn in the next county. They threatened to burn my diner. If they want a war, they'll get it." Mr. Colburn nodded in agreement. Judith sighed. "I can't believe it's come to this. But if we don't stand up now, it'll only get worse." Kat offered a tight, encouraging smile. "All right, we keep this between us. I'll start setting up a plan. We'll need the element of surprise. Let's hope we can resolve this quickly without anyone getting seriously hurt. But if they push us, we push back, hard." As they parted ways, Kat felt both a surge of resolve and a pang of sadness. She had chosen this quiet life to escape the violence of her past, yet fate was dragging her back into the fray. She couldn't abandon these people. This time, her battlefield would be her own hometown, and the stakes were higher than any classified mission she'd undertaken before. The moonlit night arrived with an eerie stillness. Following Kat's plan, volunteers took up positions around key locations in town: the diner, the bakery, the hardware store, and the truck stop on the outskirts. Armed with radios, they stayed vigilant, concealed in back rooms or hidden vantage points. Kat herself was stationed atop the hardware store's roof, a vantage that allowed her to see most of Main Street. She wore dark clothing and a lightweight tactical vest. A suppressed pistol rested at her side, and a scoped rifle lay within arm's reach, though she prayed she wouldn't have to use it. Shortly after midnight, the roar of motorcycle engines broke the silence. The Firewolves MC thundered down the main drag, more numerous than before. Kat counted at least a dozen bikes. The riders split into groups, some heading toward the diner, others toward the truck stop. One cluster parked near the hardware store, apparently intent on looting it or teaching the owner a lesson for refusing to pay protection money. Kat waited for the right moment. Her radio crackled with anxious voices from the volunteers. "They're trying to break in the back door." George's hushed tone came through, laced with alarm. "Someone just smashed a window." The tension ratcheted up, a tight wire humming with the promise of conflict. Through her scope, Kat watched three bikers jostle a heavy crowbar against the hardware store's reinforced back door. Another stood guard, scanning the street. She drew a steady breath, aligning her crosshairs on the ground near their feet. Her heart hammered as she squeezed the trigger, sending a single warning shot into the pavement. The bullet sparked off the concrete, making them jump back in shock. A sharp cry of "Sniper!" cut through the air. Within seconds, the bikers scrambled for cover behind their motorcycles. One of them fired a shot wildly into the darkness, the muzzle flash briefly illuminating their fear-twisted faces. Kat's radio crackled again. Someone spotted the group at the diner brandishing weapons, but they hadn't started shooting yet. Kat's voice, calm and authoritative, came across all volunteer radios. "Keep your heads down. Return fire only if you're in immediate danger." She refused to let this devolve into a bloodbath if it could be avoided. Another shot rang out from the bikers, striking the store's wall. Kat clenched her jaw. The time for caution was ending fast. She squeezed off another round, this time aiming for a rear tire on the nearest motorcycle. It exploded in a burst of rubber and metal, sending the bike crashing sideways. The effect was instantaneous. The bikers realized they were pinned down by a marksman, and they had no idea where the shots were coming from. Suddenly, the radio crackled with George's urgent whisper. "One of them is heading around the side of the building with a Molotov cocktail." Kat swung her rifle over, scanning the perimeter. Sure enough, a figure was creeping along the hardware store's side alley, a lit rag protruding from a glass bottle in his hand. If he reached the back door, he could set the building ablaze and potentially trap the volunteers inside. Kat's heart pounded as she lined up the shot. She fired, hitting the hand holding the bottle. With a yelp of pain, the biker dropped the Molotov cocktail, which shattered on the ground and burst into flames at his feet. He scrambled away, clutching his wrist, cursing loudly. The sudden blaze lit the alley in a flickering orange glow, momentarily revealing Kat's silhouette on the roof. A hail of bullets tore through the night sky, forcing her to duck down. Sparks flew as rounds ricocheted off the metal signage. She returned 2 shots in quick succession, forcing the shooters to take cover again. By now, the entire street was caught in the chaos. Engines revving, gunshots echoing, and shouted commands crackling over the radios. The Firewolves MC were caught off guard, their arrogance unraveling into confusion. They had never expected a small town with a quiet lawyer to mount such a coordinated defense. Still, they were desperate and dangerous, and this confrontation was far from over. Kat exhaled, recalling her training. They would have to break the bikers' resolve fast or risk a prolonged and bloody battle. "Hold your positions," she whispered into her radio, steeling herself for the next move. The fight for Sweetwater County and for the peaceful life Kat had built was now fully underway. From a personal perspective, Catherine Duvall's journey reminds us that quiet courage can rise even when faced with overwhelming threats. Her decision to stand up for her hometown, combining her legal expertise with her former special ops skills, showcases both resilience and compassion. In the end, justice prevails, not through brute force alone, but through unity and unwavering resolve. The Firewolves MC, once confident in their intimidation tactics, learned the hard way that determination and a well-coordinated defense can overcome seemingly impossible odds. As we wrap up this thrilling adventure, we hope you walk away inspired by Kat's bravery and the community's solidarity. If you enjoyed the story, please share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your ideas, interpretations, and any other feedback. Thank you for joining us on this ride. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more gripping tales and discussions.